Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Honestly, Let's Talk. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each week I try to pick a different topic or conversation that I want to have, and I just use it to invite people that I love to hang out with. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about this week, something that is really important to me is something called restorative practices. And I've got a lot of friends in the field who are really specialists and work in that. And when I thought, who do I want to invite? I was like, oh, I have not got to hang out with this person in forever. And she just released a brand new book over it as well. So I thought, who better on to have than Marisol? So Marisol, thank you for being here. Kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really beautiful to spend this time with you. I am Marisol Rerucha. I am the mother to Camerina, Emilia, and Sofia. I am the daughter to Irma Navran. I am the grandmother to Isabela Luna, Cynthia Eliana, and Lorenzo Martin. And I am the granddaughter to Camerina Rodriguez Castro, Alejandro Castro, Carmen Bedoya Quevedo, and Francisco Quevedo. I'm also the very proud wife to Daniel. I am the sister to Alex, Atia, and Cameron. So thank you for that moment to introduce myself. It's always important for me to ground myself. So I say that to myself in any space that I walk into, and I'm honored when I have the opportunity to introduce myself in that way, because it reminds me that who I am and the voice that you hear doesn't really belong to me. I believe that my ancestors, and I know that my elders and that my relatives that walk with me in this life they pray for me. And people that have never touched me and never held me prayed for me and prayed for this moment, and they pray for the work, and they prayed, over the words that come out of my mouth that allow me to connect with people. And I know also that I carry the prayers for our future ancestors. Mm-hmm. So it always grounds me and reminds me, because I have to be honest, like I struggle sometimes with my self-esteem, and it reminds me, like, this is not about you, boo. Like, you are like there's, you are not alone, and there is so much of prayer and hope in everything that we do. So thank you for that moment.
Well, I've heard you introduce yourself before somewhere else. I don't remember where. And I just loved listening to it. So I was hoping that was how you introduced yourself everywhere. But I got to say, I have been looking forward to this conversation so much, because what a lot of people may not know about Marisol is, she works at the Dave Burgess publishing company, and she does a lot of different things. And I have really gotten to know through some of the books that I've published recently. But I got to say, Marisol, I have been looking forward to this conversation just because I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but I love talking with you, because I was telling my wife this the other day, I leave every conversation just so filled and invigorated, just because you have such a beautiful way of sharing wisdom and truth and honesty, and it's so clear that it emanates so deeply inside you, which is why when I knew I wanted to talk about this, you were the first person on my list to talk. And so as we kind of dive into this, this is a hot topic right now. We're hearing, over the last year or so, I've been hearing the words more and more as I am connecting with different people. But I know when we talk about something that has become a hot topic, sometimes it is misunderstood. And so I'd love to kind of hear from you. How would you define restorative practices?
Well, I want to thank you for your words, and I want to remind you that we are reflections of each other. And all that, and I think that if we can all continue in life remembering that both the positive interactions, the beautiful interactions, the boring ones, like all of them, like we're reflected in those moments. And, I have to go to why restorative practices, like why and why now, and why is it the answer to something? And restorative practices are really centered around Indigenous ceremony. And when I say Indigenous ceremony, like Indigenous to cultures throughout the world, the way of sitting together in a circle, that is sacred work. and the dialogue, the problem solving, the connection, the listening to one another, the real, like that connection in our humanity. And when I say that, I also mean like in the darkness, right? In the darkness of our humanity, and the willingness to work through that darkness together is really what restorative practices is based in. And it's happened for centuries, again, throughout the world. And the reason, like, why now, is really because of our system. And I really see this as fact, that systemic oppression exists, and our educational system is a system that has oppressed our students, particularly our Black, Indigenous, and our Brown students, and our students who are in poverty, and our students who have special needs. And what that oppression has caused is it has caused generational trauma, and it has caused inequity. It is a system, the oppressive system is built so that there is inequity, so that there is always, some groups being pushed down to the bottom. And what that results in is it results in the school to prison pipeline, which we see through the high number of suspensions and expulsions, again, predominantly of our African American, our Black male students, and our Brown students. And in some areas, our Indigenous students, males, have those highest numbers. It also results in academic disparities, and also in the continuation of poverty, and really a lack of social, emotional, and physical health. And so, like, how do we combat that? How do we answer that? And I think the way of doing that is our system needs to be transformed. But the system is built and run by us, by people. Mm-hmm. And so it's really us, really, my belief in the way that I see it is that we need to start really doing some work within ourselves. And the answer lies within us. And I see that inequity being a lack of peace. And Mother Teresa said something, and I'm going to get it wrong, but she said, we have no peace because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. Mm-hmm. And so that winds up causing this division that we can see in, the us versus them, the teacher versus student, the teacher versus family, the student versus student, the group versus group. And if we can get back to remembering that we belong to one another, and that can be done through restorative practices. And so restorative practices, like the term, it's part of the Restorative Justice Initiative from the 1970s. And it was actually, the idea was founded, I believe it was a probation officer who wanted to bring together and change, how, when harm happened or a crime happened, wanted to really be able to impact what was happening for the person that was then stuck into the system, into the prison industrial complex, or into, the justice system. And so the idea was to really start bringing together the person that had been harmed, or the people that had been harmed, with the person that had done the harming, and start to really talk about how you were affected, why it happened. And that's, of course, where, trauma comes in. We know that hurt people, like all of those things. So, when people are causing harm, it's because there's some things within that need to be, like, looked at and reflected on and healed. And so this offers a way of that. And it also, so the international RSP, they have a really, really great training where they break down, like punitive discipline, the idea of consequences, but restorative practices, the restorative justice movement allows you to come together and say, okay, how are we going to repair the harm that was done and restore relationships? Yeah. But I see it much more as that. I see it more as a way of being. I see it being about, that do you have the mindset that we are, like Brian Stevenson says, we are much better than the worst thing we've ever done. Like, do you believe, that we are more than just our negative actions? So I think having that mindset, and then also the heart set, like, do you have that heart for people in connection and humanity? And do you walk in the world in that way? And so I view the work as more of how you walk in this world, as opposed to just something that you do in the classroom to reduce suspensions and expulsions. And also it's work that needs to be done with everybody in the system.
Well,
So
and that's what I love about what you just said there is sometimes as educators, I think we can hear about things like restorative practices and think that it is solely something for the students. And what I love is that these are skills and mindsets that exist with any age that you can use that really just grow us all as better people, period.
well, and the reason why staff need it, and not just since this is beyond school systems, but like when harm happens, or if the culture isn't good in the school, or if staff aren't feeling respected, or if they're not feeling valued, like where do they have to go? Where do they have to express that? If they're coming in carrying their own trauma, or if they're coming in, like where does that space exist? And also, if there is conflict or potential conflict, we do not really learn and model how to resolve conflict or uncomfortable, difficult conversations. That's something that we more avoid. And it comes out in passive aggressive ways, and harm, like eventually it'll come out.
Yeah.
But really it's a way that allows us and teaches us together to really be vulnerable, be authentic, show up as who we are, and learn how to really speak our truths.
Yeah. Well, and you just released a new book called Beyond the Surface of Restorative Practices, but I love so much the byline, which is building a culture of equity, connection, and healing. And it's that word healing that I just I see it and I connect so deeply with that message and the message behind this. So talk to me a little bit about what the book covers and why it would be beneficial for people to check it out.
So there's, I don't know if you had this experience, but like reading, once I got the book in my hands, it was much different than reading it on the computer. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I want to redo. there's like, oh, like I want to go in there. But so in answer to your question, I share a lot about myself, and I share a lot about the journey, and I share a lot about my beliefs. And I really, I spend some time really wanting to ground us in this idea that we do belong to each other, and that we need to be willing to do this work within ourselves, to be vulnerable. So I believe that most of us, right? I know that my job on this planet is to be the best version of myself. But in order to do that, I have to face what is keeping me from being the best version of myself. And that's the space, that's the brave space. That's the vulnerable space. That's the authentic space, because I have to be like really honest with myself about issues of ego, control, self-esteem, like all of those, like why am I being like affected or impacted by that? Jealousy, like all of those things. And so I go, so a lot of that is in there. But what I really, really love is some of the work. I came to this as somebody who implemented restorative practices with my staff, and not necessarily. So I started doing the work as the school principal with students, but I wasn't in the classroom. And so I've had a phenomenal success with my staff in building a restorative culture. And so that's included in there. And what I found is that you really have to set the foundation. And what that means is that, it's so simple, but it's so like real. You have to establish agreements or norms or your code of conduct of how you're going to treat each other, what your expectations are for each other. But you don't just set them, like you have to live them. And
I was going to say, because that's a common thing in education. Like all the time we'll say, oh, let's set the norms, let's do this. But there's really nothing else done other than, okay, we wrote it down, we checked that box.
No, and so like practice them.
Yeah.
So if somebody in practice, so like that would be like our icebreakers. So if one of the norms is, like, give me a norm, not taking up all of the airspace, right? So then, you make it an icebreaker activity, get in teams, and, everybody take a norm and show that norm being broken and how it could be addressed.
I like that.
And then we talk about it, and then we have a circle around it, right? Like, what
But
about
see,
that
and
work?
that's so simple, but as an administrator, I never thought to do that. And I always wondered, like, how do I get these norms across to people, like ways that they can, because I think coming up with the norms is easy, but coming up with how do we adhere to these norms is much more difficult. But what you just shared there, that is such an easy way for people to act it out in a stress-free environment and get ideas right there.
And then you have like expectations of how you can hold up your expectations, right? And then those should be reviewed at the start of every meeting. And those can be used, like if you have general norms, like you can do that in all of your spaces.
Yeah.
The other thing, and it's like this again, there's nothing new that I'm going to say. It's just how it's used. So like your belief statements. What do you collectively, so I forgot one piece, which is collective decision making. So as the leader stepping into the role, allowing and providing and creating this inclusive space for all staff to have input into where it is that you're going together. And so the agreements are a great way of doing that. Another way is your beliefs. What do you believe collectively about your work? And so I include in the book how to go through that process. So like the reflective questions to ask, like the timing of it, getting together, the process of working through it, so that you come up with these belief statements that drive, and that becomes your mission, right? But they drive your work, and they're really beautiful. So imagine your school having statements about what you believe about the work, which includes like, what do you believe about students? What is it that drives you? But that being something that your entire organization has created and had input in. And then of course your mission and vision, which should be living documents. They should be reviewed every year. They shouldn't just sit in a beautiful poster. Like they need to be very present, and they should be the goal, like not the goal, but they should be what you're looking at when you are making decisions. When you are making decisions for your students, with your staff, with families, those should be at the center. Because where the funkiness comes in systems is that decisions are made that are not aligned to what you say. And that's where the funk happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so really like setting the foundation. So that's included in the book. And then also I go into like how to handle, like when people, the challenges of implementing restorative practices, what some of the common ones are, and some ideas of how to work through them and with them. And the other piece that I have to mention, so I've been out of the classroom, and my very, very dear friend, and I consider him my brother, Pedro Terrazas, he is a restorative practices specialist, and very much he is a leader in the indigenous ceremonial community, and he just does a really beautiful job of talking about like this work through that lens and the work with kids. And so there's sections throughout the book called Highlights from the Classroom that talk about the work that he's done in just such a beautiful, beautiful voice. And he says, like this work, it's a prayer. And it's so like, it's a little funky, right? Like talking that way in schools, but hey, like whatever it is that we believe, that doesn't mean that it has to be to a God. It could be prayer to self, right? And then also Dr. Anjali Lafabri included a chapter on effective listening, really, really phenomenal, and Dr. Carolyn Gary on trauma. So I included those resources, and like anything, right? Like we don't do this work alone. I don't walk in this life alone, and so there's no way that this book was going to be written alone.
I love it. And I love that there's so many layers to this. It's not, and so no matter where I am in this journey, there'll be great takeaways for the reader. And so, but I've got to ask, of course, during this conversation is you've done these things in real life. You've done it with adults. And obviously when we actually put things into practice, we make some mistakes along the way, or we're like, you know what, I thought that would be a really great idea, but it didn't work out. Or this works, but not with every single group. And I learned that. When you reflect on your own experiences with restorative practices, is there something you learned that just really did not work the way you were anticipating?
So I'm gonna do what they do, what you're taught to do in job interviews, but this is really genuine. Like I'm gonna tell you the issue, but then tell you the great success that it was.
There we go.
And I talk about it in the group with the team that I worked with that had been together for many, many, many years. And they were a family that had a lot of, there were years of things that were built up that I stepped into.
Yeah.
And so we did some really great work of coming with the agreements, identifying how harm has impacted them. We wound up doing mediations. Like we put a lot of energy into this. And one day there were two staff members in the office and they got into it with each other in a really ugly way that um, almost tore apart the team.
Right.
And this beautiful thing that we had been working towards, I didn't know if we were going to be able to rebuild.
Mm.
And I remember really feeling disappointed because I felt like we had come so far together. And I just resigned myself and talked to them like, we may not have that. We might just all need to accept that we're not going to have the work environment that we wanted, which is to like really be that family that has each other's backs. But then like if then we need to move into professional mode and be really clear then about how we were going to be and like the accountability piece between that, like and without that sense of love, I think that we all wanted. And it was almost like a resignation. But you know what, Todd? So walking into that meeting with this group of adults, I think we were together 2, maybe 3 hours in this room. And by being quiet and by being a part of the process, and not, like we actually together were able to work through it. And the two people that had the incident like went deep and shared things like the vulnerability of why they reacted the way that they reacted were things that came from childhood. And that team remained, like that closeness from that time remains. Not that there weren't issues,
of course,
that continued, but I think that reminds me about one of the things that I talk about, and I don't think it's included in the book, but Dave Chief, who was in Oglala Lakota, you can find this. I found this poster about the sacred circle, and he writes, and I don't have it memorized, but he writes something like, the circle is designed to create unity. No one is in front of you, no one is behind you, no one is above you, and no one is below you. And I think walking into that space, walking into that room, like all of us as human beings with this hope, right, is what was able to get us through. But that's my answer to your question. And I think it's just continuing to have faith in humanity.
Well, I want to kind of, I love that answer and I love that story. Like to me, those are like real world examples of, it wasn't easy work. It didn't happen right away and it wasn't perfect every day after then, but it was a step in the right direction. And so speaking of steps in the right direction, something I heard you mention, I believe twice during this conversation. And, people who haven't experienced very public success, when they see somebody experience something publicly, like publishing a book, they believe that, oh, well, that person's got it all together. They're so secure. Like, wow, I want to be like them. And people like me and you are like, no, I do not have it all together. I'm still stressed out about putting this out into the world. And so I'd love to just kind of dive into that a little bit. Was there some kind of reckoning within yourself to go, I'm worthy to put my name on this and have that out there? And how did you work through that?
Well, and that's why the way that I introduced myself is so important to me, because that's my reminder that, because like I think when I talked about my self-esteem, like that idea of the worthiness, like that's me getting caught up in my stuff.
Right.
That's me getting caught up in what's keeping me from being the best version of myself. So the self-doubt, I mean, like the night before it came out, I felt like in a little cave in my room. And like imagining half-star reviews.
Yep.
And I think also that feeling like, and they talk a lot about the imposter syndrome, like someone's going to find out I'm not really like, and so what helped me and what was been so that happened. I've been going to therapy. I have the blessing of this beautiful friendship with a tia, my sister, my comadre, since I was 12 years old. Like having those things and the learning and the growth through therapy with my comadre for all these years, really, like, when I was there in my room, like with all this fear, I told myself, tomorrow the book's going to come out and you're going to do everything you can to enjoy every step of the process. Like, okay, like have your pity party tonight, have your
Yep.
fear party tonight, but tomorrow. And one of the really beautiful things that happened is one of my cousins sent me a video of my aunt who's in her 80s.
You posted that, didn't you? I was gonna say I saw it.
And the pride in her eyes, it reminded me, like, this isn't about me. And also, like, we're human beings. And so, you know what? Like, the book doesn't have to be perfect, but I believe there's a reason why it exists.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why Pedro's involved and why Carolyn and Anjali is involved. Like, it's not about me. So let me get out of the way and let it exist. Let it be the gift that it's intended to be, you know. And I talk about it, that it was really written with a lot of love, but in saying that, like, love is the hardest thing to do. Like, so some of the messages, like, it doesn't mean it's easy to read. It doesn't mean that you're gonna, you know, but yeah, you know, like, I never pretend to have all the answers.
Yeah.
That's inauthentic. Nobody does. But together we can get closer, you know?
Well, I hope everybody listening or watching this goes and gets a copy of your book. Because you are just filled with brilliant ideas that I'm like, every time I go, okay, I need to write this down, or like little moments that I want to just put on a little quote image and be like, I'm just going to quote Marisol and have this little creative image. But I know that book is fantastic, and I have my copy on the way and can't wait to dive into it as well. But as we close out, Marisol, I'd love to know, you know, we covered a lot of different things today and a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And so if people are going to walk away with one thing, what's the one thing you hope they walk away with?
I just want people to know that they're loved.
Mm.
And like, even like, if you're in a dark moment or a light moment or whatever moment it is that you're in, there's people that you don't know. There's so much love and light that is coming to you and is reaching out to strengthen you and protect you and be with you in your joy and be with you in your sadness. Like, just to know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Ever.
Well, Marisol, I am so thankful for you making time to spend a little bit with me tonight and sharing your brilliance with the world. So thank you for coming on Honestly, Let's Talk.
Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to see the pictures of your babies, to see the little eyes. I'm so happy for you and for your wife. Thank you so much, Todd. Thank you for who you are and all that you do in this world.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Honestly, Let's Talk. Remember, you can check out these live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Central on Facebook or YouTube. And you can check out all the past recordings on Spotify or SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your stuff. It's there. Hope to see you next week.